so much to talk about, but let's begin with the BuzzFeed exclusive with regards to the Mueller probe. Just your general comments on the farrago that was the BuzzFeed story, and then I would love to get your take for our listeners on where we stand with the whole special counsel and what your expectations are, Tom.
Well, I think the BuzzFeed story is just a natural consequence of this out-of-control special counsel investigation that's been hanging over the president since, frankly, before he was president, because elements of it were obviously in place in 2016. And you've got this this atmosphere where you've got this special counsel that implies that the president has done something wrong. So when something like this comes out, however weak the story is, the media pounces. And on top of that, the story is still problematic in the sense that there were two federal law enforcement sources who were either lying or misstating documents that were something they should not have been doing. So there are potential crimes underlying the initial leaking that led to the story, if the story is to be believed at all, that the sources are being appropriately disclosed. But what a disaster! And it shows you the special counsel is really ruining D.C. in terms of inhibiting the ability of the president to conduct business, and is really unhinging the way our government's supposed to be operating, in the sense that it's impacting negatively on the ability of the president to be president and do what he needs to do as president. And secondly, it's suggesting that there ought to be impeachment simply by its existence, as opposed to the fact the president has done nothing wrong and there's no basis for impeachment.
Explain to the layman out there. I'm not a lawyer. I'm sure most of our listeners aren't. The whole office.
I'm not either. I just play one on TV.
You do it well. Explain to us what the whole office of special counsel is meant to do. My understanding is that there has to be some kind of conflict of interest inside DOJ or inside the administration. Doesn't there also have to be some kind of crime or predicate of a crime?
You would think. The special counsel regulations were put in place by the Clinton Justice Department after the independent counsel law was allowed to lapse. And it's designed, presumably, to allow the Justice Department to pretend to have an independent investigation, when, in fact, for instance, Mueller has 13, as the president says, 13 angry Democrats, most of whom were Justice Department employees or are Justice Department employees who have been detailed to his office. So, in many ways, it's kabuki theater, I think we should be talking about it. The Justice Department is harassing the Trump presidency through the Mueller operation, and it needs to be shut down. And I don't buy into this idea that we should wait for the Mueller report. I think it's an abuse, and it needs to stop. And we don't need another dossier. We already have the fraudulent Clinton dossier. We don't need Mueller's version of the Clinton dossier. Let's shut it down.
But what about if this is an institution that's meant to obviate any conflict of interest? Doesn't Robert Mueller himself, forget the 13 Democrat donors that were in his team, doesn't he himself have a massive conflict of interest, given that the day before he was made special counsel by Rod Rosenstein, the acting attorney general, he interviewed for the job of director of the FBI with Donald Trump, and he failed in that interview? How could he, in a bipartisan or neutral fashion, investigate a person who he failed in front of less than a day before? Is that a stupid question, Tom?
No, it isn't. And presumably he, according to all reports, he's investigating the firing of Mr. Comey. Now, is he a witness in that? Is he going to investigate himself? Is he going to ask himself questions about his interviews or communications with the White House about potentially taking over as the FBI director again? You're exactly right. And of course, Rosenstein recommended the firing, essentially, of Mr. Comey. So he's another person who, for a time, was running and had appointed Comey. There's all sorts of conflicts. And frankly, the Justice Department, in my view, is in no position constitutionally to investigate the president for his official acts as president. I mean, you've got this absurd idea that the president fires the head of the FBI, and the retaliation is that same agency is going to investigate him.
Right.
He's the president, and if they think there's an abuse, Congress has all sorts of powers available to it. Instead, you've had the Justice Department hijacked to get back at the president, it looks like, and further target him because he had the temerity to fire the FBI director for misconduct that the president strongly believed the FBI director had engaged in.
Given what happened, we had incredibly uneventful hearings for the new Attorney General, William Barr. In comparison to recent hearings we've had, quite stunning, the lack of coverage, especially if we think about Associate Justice Kavanaugh. What do you think is going to happen when he is actually appointed with regards to the Mueller probe?
Well, Mr. Barr is close to Mr. Mueller personally. He's testified that he thinks that Mueller's probe should continue and end, and I don't think I see him reining in the Mueller probe. So I think we'll just see more of the same.
In that case, what do you think the fallout could be if the president takes your advice and tries to shut down the probe?
Well, in my view, he's protecting the presidency from being impaired by the Justice Department, which is harassing the presidency. And I don't think it's going to be any different than the Mueller report, which the left is going to use to incite for impeachment. And my view is if you're going to cause trouble defending the Constitution rather than just sitting around and waiting for Congress to try to abuse their powers to unlawfully remove you or to remove you contrary to the wishes the founders had for the impeachment power.
Well, that's a very constitutionally sound approach to what we should do with the Robert Mueller probe that seems to be never ending and costing us upwards of $30 million in just the last 2 years. You're listening to Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch, who will be sharing with us some very, very interesting news with regards to none other than Hillary Clinton after the break. Here on America First, we don't just have great guests and your calls, but we also keep you up to date with the latest breaking news here at the ReliefFactor.com studios of the Salem Radio Network. It seems as if Mitch McConnell will be tabling a vote on the president's proposal for some kind of legislative protection for 3 years for the DACA children or the DACA recipients in exchange for wall funding. So Mitch is going to table it. Not only that, the White House is saying that the president will be holding his State of the Union address. Where? Wait and see. I think given our meeting with the president last week in the Oval, I think we can expect an interesting tweet or two on that subject of the State of the Union imminently. But back to our guest, Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch. Follow them at judicialwatch.org if you want to support a very worthy cause in terms of draining the swamp. You could give some kind of support to Judicial Watch, and also follow Tom Fitton at Tom Fitton, T-O-N. Tom, you are in the midst of suing the State Department over what exactly?
Oh, many things, but most importantly for purposes of this program is that we were suing for the Benghazi talking points information. And it was that lawsuit, that Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, that forced the government to disclose they've been hiding the Clinton emails from us, the American people, Congress, and everyone else all these years. And just recently, in fact, last month or so, Judge Horace Lamberth, the federal court judge, ruled that, look, it looks to him like he was hoodwinked. They attempted to hoodwink the court, and he called it one of the gravest modern offenses to government transparency. And it authorized Judicial Watch to take discovery on whether or not the Clinton email system was designed to thwart FOIA, and more specifically as well, whether the Benghazi scandal, that cover-up where they blame the video rather than the al-Qaeda terrorists behind it, was behind, and one of the reasons that we didn't know about the Clinton emails and the State Department didn't want to search her records was just something they were concerned about coming out.
Okay, so let's stop it. Let's just reiterate this because this is incredibly important. So the allegation is the whole private, unsecure email server that Hillary illegally set up could have been set up to deliberately obviate the Freedom of Information Act requirements for government records. When you get discovery, does this mean that we could find some of those missing emails, or is this to do with internal State Department documents that could prove that she was skirting the law?
Yeah, I think that's what, in part, the discovery might be able to find. Key State Department witnesses who knew about records at the State Department will have to be questioned under oath. Benghazi, Susan Rice and Ben Rhodes. Susan Rice, the former Obama UN ambassador who went on 5 Sunday morning talk shows and lied about the Benghazi scandal, will have to answer our written questions under oath. Mrs. Clinton's lawyer, who was involved in destroying half of the emails she took from the State Department, will also testify under oath. So, I mean, this is just an incredible development for transparency and accountability on this issue. The American people want something done on it. Justice Department actually tried to thwart our efforts to get these questions answered. This Justice Department said, the deep staters, but thankfully Judge Royce Lamberth allowed our discovery to go forward, and we're going to start, as soon as the government shutdown ends, we'll get in full gear here.
Wow. Thank you to Judge Lambert. Thank you especially to you, Tom Fitton, and thank you to your whole team, Chris Farrell and everybody else. One of the few people outside government that is fighting the Obama holdovers, the swamp dwellers, and those who simply do not wish to be held accountable. Please follow Tom Fitton on Twitter at Tom Fitton, and also support judicialwatch.org. Wow. Thank you, Tom. Keep doing what you do. God bless you and the whole team.